That was great, and I will stand up in a few minutes. First of all, I just want to say ditto to everything that she said. I'm glad that she said it. I'm going to try and build off of it, though, and not repeat too many things. So the original assignment was to think about changes that could happen in less than 5 years, and I'm at about 5 years, and Elliot was 5 years later. So my first question to you is, what's going to happen within 5 years? What's the big thing on your mind? Yes, y'all are gonna have tenure, right? Or you're gonna decide it's for the birds and we'll all be off making more money in industry or something like that, right? Okay, but that's something that's really big that's gonna change. Anybody think that within 5 years they're looking at like a department chair or a dean position? Anybody want to admit to that? Not even the deans are raising their hands on that. Okay. Okay, but my first point that I want to make is that you should not wait until you're in a formal position of power. So it's partly because the deans that I can get to talk to me about this sometimes don't feel like they're in power, right? It's that situation of you're trying to herd cats. So there's always going to be situations where you're the new person. There's people who think that they know better than you, they have certain kinds of experience that are more valuable than yours, and they don't want to listen to you. So you might as well change your orientation now, change your thinking, and think about what are strategies that you can do to influence people when you're not in that formal position of power. Okay, it's pretty naive to think, when I'm in charge, I'm just going to make a rule, and people are going to have to do it that way. That's not how it works. Okay, and that's not a surprise to very many of you. I'm just here to remind you of that. Okay, and so one way to think about that is at universities, you can't make a policy change without a cultural change to go along with it, right? So if people don't agree with the policy, they're not going to enforce it, right? We all have people that maybe we wish we didn't work with because they're really, really good at digging in their heels and not changing things. You have a surprising amount of power when you choose not to do something, right? Okay, that reminds me of a book that I would probably recommend as a good read. It's called Tempered Radicals. There's a lot of really good stories in that book. It's about change, but it's about change in lots of different walks of life, lots of different careers. What I got out of the book, though, is there's a lot of policies that don't really make any sense, rules that don't make any sense. And you should use your professional judgment, make sure that people are going to be safe and there's no legal implications, but there's a lot of times where you just don't have to enforce the policy. You don't have to remind people that there's a policy against it. If you think it's stupid and you think it's holding things up, you can choose not to do that. Okay, so that has positive implications. It's not just digging in your heels and resisting change. We kind of disagreed on this when we were talking about our panel beforehand. That what are assistant professors supposed to do? You're supposed to keep your head down and be selfish, or what does that mean? What does keep your head down mean? So I kind of adjusted my advice to, you should be selfish. You should do the things that you care about, the things that are going to come back to you, not get yourself involved in activities that somebody else is going to take credit for or get credit for, right? Not get sucked into that. But once you get tenure, once you're an associate professor, I think you're in a nice sweet spot. Okay, partly because we haven't beaten it out of you yet. You're still excited about things. You're still you're innovative. You're coming up with new ideas. You have the energy to pull those ideas off. Okay, and you have the protection of tenure. So you can be taking bigger risks. So not just the risks for yourself that I think you should be taking in as assistant professor, but risks on behalf of a bigger part of the organization. So I want to work in a place where we take care of students, or I want to work in a place where we support each other and we're innovative. And you start doing things for the good of the organization. Okay, so the first thing I want to do in my remarks today is empower you to do that. I wish I had a prop or a magic wand. I empower you to go forth and make change. Okay. The second part, which I think I'm probably going to just fast forward through, but we were talking about this at dinner, that it could be harder than you think to find partners and information about how to get involved in engineering education research. So I jotted down some interesting ways to learn about that and to find people that you might not have thought of, but I'm just going to say that if you really, really want to know, you're going to have to ask during Q&A. Okay. Third part, I'm actually going to get up and use a slide and a pointer and technology. Okay, this is going to be a little bit theoretical, but I think it's pretty powerful in helping you think about change activities. Is this mic on? Or okay. Has anybody seen this before? This is so the main author would be Charles Henderson. Okay, so just a couple hands. So this is kind of a tough thing to take in the first time. So I hope that you'll bear with me, and I want to just focus on what you can get out of this without understanding, really all of the details. So this is an organizing schema. It could be a theory for thinking about different change initiatives. Okay. So the way that they came up with this was analyzing the literature, a couple hundred articles where people wrote about undergraduate STEM instructional change practices, like how do you get faculty to do more of all kinds of things that you've been talking about in the last couple days. And they came up with 4 different categories that they could put things in. I think the value of this is not really in understanding the details of what each category is or the nuances of why one change initiative might fit in one category or another. That's something that takes time. You need to probably see this a couple times, read the article, have some time to digest it. But the value of it is that it opens up a lot of possibilities. So we find over and over again, and I've used this on a couple different projects to categorize change initiatives, even big ones that have multiple parts to it, and map those parts to the 4 quadrants on here. And what we find over and over again is that individual people, certain projects, even groups of people, broad groups of people like faculty members who are interested in engineering education research, all tend to cluster in one category and not really across the whole range of things. And so having this schema is almost like a checklist for you as you're going through an activity to say, okay, what can I do that works in this quadrant? And what can I do that would support my efforts in this other quadrant? And what could I do that works in that quadrant? So I'm going to explain a little bit more detail to help you out. So how we end up with the 4 is that it's a 2x2. So the 2 dimensions are first, individuals versus organizations and structures. So these 2 at the top focus on changing individual people, okay? And usually that's faculty members, but this also extends to professors and administrators and those kinds of things. So I think the way that things are going to change is that I'm going to target a whole lot of individual faculty members. And then once we get lots and lots of those, then the whole, the environment and how we do things is going to change. Okay, and at the bottom are the ones that focus on environment and structures. Okay, and that's more like I'm going to look at how we schedule classes or how we evaluate people or how we do our business, and that's going to have a secondary effect on how people do things, and that's going to change the world. So you can see that these are linked. It's probably not as black and white as you think, but there's, you tend to be a little bit more on one side or the other. Okay, and then the other 2 dimensions are the prescribed versus emergent. So over on the left side here are the ones where I know what the outcome is that I want. Okay, I know what it looks like. I just need to get you to do it. And again, I'm going to do that by either focusing on getting individuals to do the very specific thing I want or getting organizations to do the very specific thing I want them to do. Okay, and then on the far side, you have the emergent ones. So I don't really know what that looks like. Okay, but I can focus on getting individuals to do something that's kind of in a certain direction, but I'm not sure what it looks like, or I can focus on getting the organization to do something that's in sort of a different direction, but I don't know what it looks like. Okay, so what's happening with change initiatives, and Elliot's not necessarily going to talk about in terms of this 4 square, but he's going to give you a lot more examples about change initiatives that are happening in engineering education. I think you could get just about anybody to agree that we've been spending too much time up here in this quadrant 1, disseminating curriculum and pedagogy. So we've put a lot of money and effort in engineering and other STEM disciplines to developing curriculum, making it almost idiot-proof for busy faculty members and say, look, I created this whole curriculum for you. I just want you to do it in your class. Please do it in your class, right? Okay, but we're the cats that can't be herded. Right, so nobody wants to do that. So we just keep creating stuff, and nobody's using it, and we're like, why isn't this happening? This is not working, right? What's going on? Okay, so now there's a lot more effort on organizations and environments and structures, and I think you've heard that for the last couple of days. You've got to think about the culture. Think about what's the context that people are in. You can't just target the one person that teaches statics at every university, in the United States. You have to think about where did they work, who are their colleagues, what are all the other classes that they have to teach, how are they evaluated, and how are you going to change the culture on that? So there's a lot more effort down in this quadrant, and I think we're at a point where that's really It's much more popular. It's almost the right answer. When you tell people what your change initiative is doing, there's definitely a tendency to want to say, oh, I'm down here. I'm doing this wildly emergent, transformative thing that I don't know what it is, right? But it's very, very, very hard to be down there. So one of the articles down here, if you're going to look those up, is really the whole point of the article was to give you examples. We couldn't come up with a good example of something that anybody's ever done in here, okay? It's really, really hard to do, but people feel like that's the right answer and they want to say that they're down there. But when we, look at what they're doing, it's, well, maybe they're over here, they're doing something more with policy. They have a specific policy change that they want to make to get people to change their behaviors. And so examples of that would be, ABET or promotion and tenure, those kinds of things would fit there. Or I'm going to support people, and really it looks more like a faculty development program and those kinds of things. Okay, so my critique is, I think what's happening with the change efforts is that there's been like a pendulum swing, that we're going maybe even too far in this direction, that we've been doing too much individual stuff, and now it needs to be all about the organizations, and it needs to be wildly emergent, okay? And that a lot of us think that that's the right answer now. That's going to solve the problem. If we could just do that, if we could just figure out how to do that, then everything else would fall into place, and we'd be doing all the active learning that we need to be doing. I think it's probably a little too far, though, and I predict that in a couple years, we'll see, a little bit more of a, well, okay, that didn't work either, so what's the next thing? And so, again, as I said in the beginning, I think the real value is having this whole thing, having all 4 quadrants to sort of think through it. So you can have, I think as an individual, it's really natural to be attracted to one of these or the other as your orientation towards thinking about change. Okay, but to go through the exercise of going through the others and seeing what other strategy you have there. So the last thing I want to do is just go through a really quick example. So if you were trying to do a super emergent shared vision for your organization, so you think about it would be something like strategic planning, but there's ways that strategic planning even is a little bit so structured that it would be a little bit more like a policy thing. But something, we're going to try to change the culture, and I don't know what it's going to look like, and I don't even know how we're going to do it because that's how emergent it is, okay? So I'm going to try to do that. What's going to help support that? Can you imagine if you told your colleagues that's what you were going to do? What would they say? Right, what are you talking about? You're crazy, what's going on, right? How's that going to happen, right? Okay, so if you go through these other quadrants, you would spend some time looking at your policies. What are the policies we have that influence how people act? What are people evaluated on? What do we tell them that's important? What are things we do about the teaching load and scheduling courses and even the requirements for how students move through our curriculum and those kinds of things? And how do those make people behave in ways that are maybe competitive with each other and not as collaborative as we'd like them to be, or not want them to engage in these activities, those kinds of things. So you can examine that. This is actually also, that's also where ABET fits in, when people use that as, unfortunately, usually an excuse for not changing things, but that's ABET's down in the policy quadrant. Okay, the other thing is if you wanted people to do lots of active learning, and they're regular faculty members who haven't had any training in this, you would probably want to get them information about what the research says, right? Without saying, well, there's a whole field out there, why don't you figure that out in your free time, right? Here's some resources, here's what the research says. And that's something that's up in this first quadrant. So making sure that you're disseminating key research results that are relevant to what you're trying to do in your setting. And that can be maybe a broader variety if what you're trying to do is something that's emergent. Okay, and then the last one is faculty development, so supporting people in being in an environment where they can bounce ideas off of each other and they can feel safe, and somebody's not going to say, why are you wasting your time on this? But, sure, I'll talk through it with you, or I'll try it in my class, or I'll sit in the back of your class while you try it and I let you know how it's working, and those kinds of things. Okay, so I just wanted to work through that quickly. I wanted to plant the seed. I wanted to let you know that this is out there. It's gaining in popularity. I think once you get over the hump of trying to understand what's going on here, it can be pretty helpful to just think about, instead of just taking a shot in the dark with a change effort, what are some ways that you can go through a checklist and think about lots of different strategies.